is Liam Fuller. I'm with the Central PA LGBT History Project, and we're going to be conducting an interview today with Harry. And today is the 6th of August, I believe.
Yes, I believe
6th
it.
6th of August.
5th or 6th, I lost track this week.
Yeah, it's hard. And then we're in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. And yeah, I think that's all the general information we need for the transcriber. So the first question we like to ask is, can you tell me your name and then spell it out for me?
It is Harry Long, Harrylong.
Okay. And then we're going to start at the beginning of your life. And
well, first of all, we want to make sure we have permission.
Oh, yeah, true.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You're here.
Very true. So let's start with your family origin and sort of your early childhood development. If you can walk me through that.
Wow.
When and where were you born first?
Okay, born here in Lebanon in 1951. Yes, the latter half of the last century. Parents were, I don't know, I guess you'd say the usual people of this area. My mother was Scots, Irish, and a soupçon of Swiss. She grew up on a farm to the north of here, which her father acquired during the Great Depression, probably as part of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt New Deal project. He had run a gas station here in town, and when the economy tanked, so did the gas station. They ended up on the farm. That's where she grew up. I do not know exactly how she met my father. I believe in school. They were in the same class at Lebanon High School. He went off in World War II, served in the Army as a medical tech or assistant kind of thing. They didn't call them MASH units in those days, but that's what he was assigned with. And they started out in Africa and went up through Italy following the conquest. And somewhere around here, I did salvage from my house fire a scrapbook of all sorts of wonderful postcards from Northern Africa and Italy. They married after the war, and he bought a house on Church Street from his grandmother, which was built in 1860. All of this is pretty extraneous information, but I had a fairly normal childhood, I suppose, until I would say probably junior high. And that's when things got very complicated for me. I'd been drawing since I was a kid, and I developed a deeper interest in art at that point. I also kind of stumbled into theater through some student performances at the junior high school, which was Henry Houck at the time. Also started writing and doing artwork for the student newspaper. And all these things kind of converge and explain some left-hand turns in my life later on. I suppose the beginning of my kind of left-wing political interest began in high school. Fell in with a Jewish crowd, became Jewish by osmosis, but it was a whole different side of intellectual curiosity that I had not been exposed to before. Paired up with one of those guys, a guy named Phil Clark, and in junior year, we wrote a satire of Macbeth, which used the school teachers as characters in the play. Having got away with that bit of transgression, in the senior year, we started what was Lebanon High School's first, and as far as I know to this date, only underground newspaper, which caused a huge tizzy, and it was slightly political, but it was more a humor kind of magazine than anything else. But apparently it caused enough of a tizzy that talk was afoot about expelling Phil and me and our other cohort, Jimmy Schaefer. So we're starting to see the political side, okay? Married to the artwork and the writing. Spent a year off between high school and college working as the bookmobile librarian, and somehow, I really do not remember exactly how this came about, became the editor of Lebanon's first, and I believe still only, underground newspaper called Stentorian. That did not last long because the publisher was not very good at getting ad sales for it, which is kind of understandable. It's that we are in still a heavily Republican area. But there's another kind of nail in the coffin of artwork, journalism, and I was still doing theater, okay? So then I attended Millersville College, took a journalism class, and worked on the school newspaper, as well as getting involved in the 2-cent Plain Dealer, which was Millersville College's university now, of course, I should remember that, underground newspaper. And that my involvement there didn't last all that terribly long because in hindsight, I mean, at the time I felt very out of my class with the people who were running it. I mean, when you're 20 or 21 and you're hearing Kant and Hegel being thrown around, it's like, whoa. Looking back, I think they were just intellectually pretentious. But through the woman I rented a room from, I got involved in the Lancaster Independent Press, or LIP. Again, doing artwork and eventually doing some writing. And this led to my first exposure with Gays United Lancaster. Mark Siegel, who is currently the publisher of the Philadelphia Gay News, although at that time he was just kind of a freelance activist, was going to come to town and talk with the members of Gays United Lancaster. Now, I don't remember if I asked for the assignment or the editors assigned me. Perhaps, even though I wasn't out at the time, they had a suspicion of what was going on. They asked me to attend the meeting and just kind of cover it and talk to Mark a little bit, which I did. And that really was when I came out. I understand that there was much discussion after my first attendance at the meeting. It was like, is he? Isn't he? Do you think? Because at that time I wasn't out. I wasn't going to the bars. You know, they did not know me at all. But I became involved in the group, and the decision was somehow made within the group, which was run by this wonderfully crazy guy named Barry Weaver, no longer with us. I believe another victim of AIDS. To take their newsletter, which was a little mimeograph thing, and turn it into a publication that would go out for a broader audience, like maybe sold in the bookstores, which in Lancaster, excuse me, would have meant the adult bookstores. And because I had some graphic experience, I volunteered to do the design, layout, etc. And after a period of time, I don't remember how long, whoever it was who was editing, and I've completely forgotten that, whoever was editing decided to withdraw, and somehow or other I became the new editor, and that went on for 5 years, till about 1980. I'm not remembering a whole lot of specifics about that, and that is because during that period I was still sometimes writing for LIP. I was also pursuing theater. I was trying to establish myself as a freelance graphic artist / illustrator. So my life was very busy. The thing I do remember about the publication, which I believe David Lees, who you've interviewed, was the publisher, and a very good publisher, by the way, very good at getting ads, very good at getting distribution. We got into Giovanni's room in Philadelphia. Is that still around? Oh, great place. And yes, I know it's still around. I was there not that long ago with friends who live in Philadelphia. Probably the Oscar Wilde in New York and some other places, but bookstores within Pennsylvania. So he managed that, did a very good job at that. I do remember one problem we had was keeping printers. We'd get an issue or two with a new printer, and then suddenly we're like, oh, our staff is really uncomfortable doing this. We will have to ask you to go somewhere else. So we changed printers frequently until David and his lover Marlon, who ran the Railroad House in Marietta, bought an offset printer from MCC. Don't ask me why they wanted to get rid of it, but they did. And then that was only capable of doing 8.5 by 11 sheets, standard letter size. So we did still ship out the cover, which was wraparound, and then had stapling parties where we assembled the damn thing and got it ready to go. So somewhere around 1980, I believe, no, would have been 1979. And I should back up here a little bit. In 1972 or 3, which is when I interviewed Mark and came out of the closet, it has been pointed out to me very recently by my housemate, that was an incredibly brave thing to do in this rural area, to be publicly out, because among other things, with the Gay Era publication, I insisted that all the writers use their own names. I mean, if it was going to be a publication about gay liberation, you didn't hide behind a phony name. The only phony name on it, well, there are two, I think. One was Sadie, who was our supposed advice columnist, which was definitely a humor article. It wasn't real advice. I mean, it was these outrageous questions to which preposterous answers were posed, and it was nuts. And I believe that was probably a group effort, but it was bylined by Sadie. And at times, I may have used the name Bob Powell, so it didn't look like I was writing every damn article in the paper. Oh, and I also remember, because Dave Lease mentioned to me at one point when we were both involved in what became the gay, my mind, the business group.
Chamber of Commerce?
Chamber of Commerce, yeah, they became affiliated with the Chamber of Commerce. He said, he was saying, we ought to go back and start another publication, but it should be a humor magazine, because that's what we always did best, was humor. And we also raised a little bit of ire from time to time. David came up with this insane idea that he would take the text from some other local publication about how to train your dog, use the text precisely, but retitle it How to Train Your Lover. And he and I got up in leather gear, and Barry photographed us, because Barry was a very good photographer, and did this article, How to Train Your Lover, complete, with masks and leather and like a leash. So we did some kind of nuts things in addition to the news coverage and so forth. So I do remember that. Around 1979, professionally, I became involved as a public relations person for a theater company called the Independent Eye, run by Conrad and Linda Bishop. And that started out as a two-person theater company, just the husband and wife, performing plays, obviously. And through them, we got wind of what I believe was possibly the first gay theater festival in Philadelphia. And I don't know if it was Joe that got the bug up his butt, or me saying, the bishops can't do anything here because they don't have the material, but why don't we come up with some material? We'll just sit around, we'll improvise, we'll type it up, we'll do it, which we did. And to somewhat surprising success, this was done on such a short schedule, we didn't have time to memorize our lines, so we're both there with scripts, reading the material, basically. And the crowd just loved it. It was like, maybe we should try continuing with this. And we did so for about 2 years. The farthest afield we traveled was Spokane and Seattle. We did one stop in between in Bloomington, Illinois, but mostly our beat was Philly, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and DC. And ultimately, we couldn't make a go of it financially because the bars which could pay never quite set things up right in advance. I mean, you have a crowd that's been discoing and drinking, and suddenly the music stops, and then we're supposed to go on, and a lot of people were not necessarily happy that their festivities were being interrupted. The gay community centers, which were a good venue, generally couldn't afford to pay our fees. We'd do the performance, and at the end they'd say, we didn't take in enough at the door, will you take blah, 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 and of course, being the soft-hearted people we were, it was always, okay, right. But financially, we were just dying, so that ended. That also ended my involvement in any kind of gay politics for a while. I've been doing a monologue here, haven't I? And at the time, I was kind of glad I was no longer editing the gay era and no longer doing the theater, because AIDS had come about, and I was thinking, God, how would I handle this? How do you, the Culture Shock, which was the name of the theater company, the Culture Shock material was primarily humorous. It was satirical, social stuff where we'd look at various things. We had one or two serious pieces, but mostly it was comedic. And how are you funny about AIDS, especially at the beginning when it was so overwhelming? And even though at that point I don't think I'd lost anyone I knew, it was still like, as a journalist, maybe I could have handled it, but everything was so up in the air. It's like, what causes it? What doesn't cause it? Where does it come from? Geez, did we even really know much until Randy Schiltz's book? But that ended some involvement for a while. I continued doing theater. I kind of maneuvered around, still trying to establish myself as a freelance graphic artist, illustrator. I did, however, this would have been around 81, heard about a gallery in New York called the Hibbs Gallery, a gay gallery. And I sent the guy some samples, and since I was kind of primarily unknown, he decided to put me in a group show rather than a whole show of my own. And when I took the illustrations up to New York, I also made an appointment with Mandate magazine to show their stuff to the editor, or my stuff rather, to the editor. And he liked it well enough that he had it all sent over to the art department. They photographed it for use. And that kind of started me on, about a 17-year career of doing illustrations for Gay Skin magazines. Let's see, worked for Mandate and all their little offshoots, Play Guy. I forget how the publisher there just kept acquiring more and more titles. He even bought out publications from other companies like Stallion, which was originally a Charlton publication, Torso, which I'm blanking on the name of the publisher there, but he had originally done Blue Boy back in the day. You're not old enough to remember. You might be. And also for the First Hand group of magazines. And unfortunately, doing gay skin illustration doesn't pay particularly well, so I kind of started referring to myself as being independently unemployed. I was also during this period of time trying to get more mainstream stuff, primarily because it pays better. I didn't have any problem doing drawings of naked men. Quite enjoyed it, actually. And things just didn't quite pan out. So in '97, I took a job in the pre-press department of the Lebanon Daily News. Initially, what I was doing was in the back with the camera they used, because they hadn't gone digital yet at that point. Even in '97, they hadn't gone digital. So the pages were, full size, pasted up. It came back to me. I slapped it on the bed of this camera that, well, it looked like King Kong's Polaroid, because it was built into the wall and it had the bellows coming out to the lens, and I put it on the bed, flipped the bed, which weighed a ton, over, and photographed the page, went into the darkroom, pulled the negative out and fed it in the processor, and ran the negative over to the plating department. And that went on for about 6 months. I figured it was a temporary assignment. I was like, okay, I can pay off some bills here and get back to the freelance artwork. And eventually the publisher, a lovely, lovely man named Andy Mick, said, oh, no, the position is temporary, you are not. So as they transitioned, I got moved out, sat down at a computer, and without any training, started doing Photoshop work. Luckily, there were a few other people in the department that knew what the hell Photoshop was about, because I was like, huh? Okay, put it here in the scanner. Oh, that button, okay. The whole, and then what? Because once you've scanned it, you've got to, quote unquote, balance it in a specific way to work on newsprint. So anyways, kind of trained myself on that, or, had help, and eventually was also doing the internet downloads, because as technology progressed, the comics were not coming in on a printed page, which we'd then, photograph or scan. No, they were online, and I would download them and file them accordingly, and some other things. Learned a hell of a lot about computers there. In fact, at one point, one of the women in the department went in for knee surgery, and I ended up doing her tasks, which was what they called the aglet page of sports, which is that page with all the scores in like type, like, get your magnifying glass out. So learned a lot of computer programs, learned a lot about how to work on the computer. Also, during that time, I started doing some freelance writing for the newspaper, initially just reviewing CDs of classical music. That led to the editor of the lifestyle section asking me if I would start doing interviews with composers and performers who were performing at music at Gretna. Now the fact is, I loved classical music, I loved jazz. I've had no musical education, so it was strictly what I liked. So basically I ended up doing these interviews because even though I didn't know any more than anyone else in the department, I was the only one that had at least enough basic knowledge to do these interviews and articles. That also led, this is getting interesting, isn't it? That also led to me deciding to start reviewing film scores for a now defunct publication called Film Score Monthly. That, well, actually, even before that, I did some film score reviewing for Crossroads, Eric Selby's magazine. Do you remember that? Whatever happened to Eric, anyway?
Still there.
Is he still there? But of course, Crossroads isn't. That it's always baffled me, particularly after running the gay era out of Lancaster for 5-6 years or whatever it was, that Harrisburg has never been able to sustain its own gay publication, or even its own community magazine, as far as I know. I think it's like every 5 to 10 years a new one pops up, and then it's around for a few years and then it disappears. Lancaster Independent Press even had a sort of sister publication called HIP, or Harrisburg Independent Press. That did not outlast Lancaster Independent Press. Anyway, first for Crossroads, then for Film Score Monthly, I ended up with a monthly column in a publication called a movie publication called Classic Images. That ran for at least 3 years. And I also started doing other articles and reviews for other classic film publications, Scarlet Street, Film Facts, Video Watchdog, I believe that's it. And then Scarlet Street's editor died from pancreatic cancer. And everyone was going, oh, how do we continue? How do we continue? And Richard left a lot of tangled finances behind. And we were told, we had the legal advice that if we continued Scarlet Street, we would incur all of his debts. And he used a very expensive printer, from what my research later showed. So I ended up editing something called Scarlet, the film magazine, which was to continue that. And now we get back into, meanwhile I've been with the Gay Chamber of Commerce people and done some work with fundraising there. Was involved with the first Fab dinner. Is Fab still going on? Designed their first logo. And some other things up there. And so now we kind of veered back in. By the 4th issue of Scarlet Street, now Richard was openly gay. The magazine had a kind of gay slant, and of course under me it still had a gay slant. we did what I think is historically the first time a magazine devoted to primarily to classic horror films, but classic films in general, did what I called an issue devoted to the horror that dare not speak its name. The entire issue had some kind of gay content. I wrote an article on a performer called Ernest Thesiger, best remembered as the crazy doctor in Bride of Frankenstein, and very swishy, gay, crazy doctor. Put him on the cover in this giant pink Q. We were told it was suicide to do that. I think our subscriptions did fall off a little bit, but there it was. As far as I know, it was the first time any classic film magazine devoted an issue strictly to gay horror films, gay performers, and so forth. And currently, after the house fire, I lost all my DVDs, which ran into the thousands. I don't like to think about how many thousands of DVDs that was. And my film reference book, so I wasn't quite sure I could continue. My writing these days is, it started for the Daily News doing DVD reviews. The current owners of the Daily News, which is Gannett, have decided that reviews of any kind underperform, so that was gone, and now it's a blog called Long's Short Takes. It's on WordPress. Oh, I'm getting tangled in my cord here. And I'm also currently one of the collaborators on a book on 1940s Universal horror movies. Same group of people I was involved with brought out a massive 2-volume, and I would say definitive look at silent U.S. horror films from McFarland. So that brings us up to date, I think. Currently another left turn in my life. My real job is as a social worker. Where did that come from? Just sort of happened. And if you want to have any questions about that, go ahead.
So dialing back a little bit, what drew you to writing for alternative publications? What was sort of missing in mainstream publications that you worked for?
Well, what was missing was generally they weren't running the kind of things I was interested in writing about. I think there was probably also a little bit of intimidation. It's like, oh, I'm just this little guy from Lebanon. Oh, I can't write for the local news. I didn't write for the Daily News until 1998 or so, and I grew up with the dang thing. I never saw myself as perhaps having enough background or whatever to fit in there. So it started out with the alternative. Now, obviously when we're talking Film Score Monthly and Film Facts, these were sold in newsstands everywhere, Barnes and Nobles and so forth. So I guess you'd call them mainstream, although it's still kind of a fringe audience. But I think intimidation played a big part of it. I've always been very insecure.
And then, so you mentioned the fact that a lot of these publications were in adult bookstores. Sort of why, we kind of know why they were in adult bookstores, but I guess sort of why do you think...
you're talking about the gay era, for instance.
The gay era, the legality issues and...
Well, the gay era was never adult content, really, but we're talking, 1973 to 1980 period. The local newsstands in Lancaster weren't going to take it. There were no gay or even feminist bookstores in Lancaster. I think one was established later. It would have been in the early 80s, and its window was broken frequently by stones and bricks. So, and it was just a feminist news. It was run by lesbians, which I guess, word got out, but it was identified as a feminist bookstore. So we were able to get into the adult bookstores where there were feminist or gay bookstores, because there was a feminist bookstore in Reading. Don't know if it's still around. They sold us, and they even helped support us by taking out advertising. So That's who would take the publication at the time. These days, I could probably get it into the newsstand up here at 9th and Chestnut here in town, you know.
Yeah.
It would probably be part of the big mix of stuff they have.
Yeah. And then what sort of drew you to classical music? I'm interested because I enjoy classical music as well.
My dad hated it. My mom loved it. So there were very few recordings around. I think the only classical music recording I can recall being in our house was, when you think about a very strange compilation, on one side was the Nutcracker Suite and on the other side was Ravel's Bolero and La Valse. It's like, okay, where did this combination come from? But at Millersville University, I roomed with a guy who was big on classical music, and I started being introduced to various things. And I like that. And slowly started, buying things myself. And typical, sometimes blind purchase. Sometimes it was like stuff I heard him play. I was like, okay, yeah, I want a copy of that myself. And sometimes I just go through the racks and go, ooh, this is an interesting cover. Or, ooh, organ, yeah, let's try that. So stumbled across a lot of stuff on my own. And in fact, ended up introducing him to various things over the years.
And then did you interview any sort of hard hitters in that industry at the time?
I would say the biggest name I interviewed a lot of people from the Philadelphia Orchestra that would do their own like little string quartet or chamber music places for music at Gretna. The biggest name I snagged in terms of the interviews would have been Chris Brubeck, David's son. And I had a wonderfully crazed interview with him. We kept going off topic all the time. We must have, at one point, I think we spent 15 minutes on Stanley Kubrick and Eyes Wide Shut. So he was willing to go the limit with me, bless him. And it turned out to be a very good interview, although the stuff about Kubrick didn't make it into the paper.
Yeah. Is that like some sort of festival music at Gretna?
Yeah, it's an annual summer. Well, it's summer in the Chautauqua building. They do, I think, 4 concerts a year in the auditorium at Elizabethtown College. And speaking of performances, one thing I forgot to mention about Culture Shock, there was, I think, again, it was the first huge rally in D.C., and we were asked to perform. And so there we are, the stage is set up, and directly across the way is the Washington Monument jutting up into the sky, which of course elicited any number of large penis jokes from various performers. But the most interesting thing there is that after the performance, Frank Kameny and Barbara Giddings came up and introduced themselves to us, which was so cool. And I actually maintained a bit of a correspondence with Frank for a few years after that, too.
Oh, awesome.
Was that the 1987 March on Washington?
No, because as I said, Culture Shock went from 79 to 81. Okay. So what rally that was, I don't remember. Oh, and that just prompted another memory of Culture Shock. There was a downtown gay festival, gay street fair, or whatever they called it, and we performed there. And I remember several men in 3-piece suits and cameras going, which was apparently not the only interaction I ended up having with the FBI. I don't know if David might have mentioned this or not, but once The Gay Era was being published in the basement of the Railroad House, at one point after that, their dumpster disappeared. They came out to throw trash out one morning and it was gone. And now obviously there were the restaurant leavings, there were the proof pages like, okay, let's get the press running, okay, throw those away. So they had to order another dumpster from the company. No one ever knew what happened quite with it, but a week later it reappeared and only the foodstuffs was in the dumpster. All the printed pages from the Gay Era were gone. So I don't know who would have done that. But we has our suspicions.
Yeah, that smells like something Hoover would do.
Well, I think Hoover was still there
Yeah.
in 80, was it 81, was it? Or
Probably.
about 80, 79 or 80, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I don't remember when he finally fell over face first onto his desk but yeah, he was still in place when he died, so.
Yeah. And then what sort of composers do you like listening to?
Oh, I'm big on the Eastern Europeans and the Russians
Okay.
especially. Yeah, like Bartok, Khachaturian, Yanakchek, Tchaikovsky, of course, Rachmaninoff, Borodin. I like some English composers. I'm very fond of Vaughan Williams.
Oh, okay.
French, well, we've got Ravel and Debussy. Those are obvious ones, but those are the ones I happen to like most. I'm trying to think if there's any Italians. German music tends to be a little heavy for my taste, but I do like the late Beethoven string quartets. Yeah, I'm blanking on Italians. Sorry about
No, it's
that.
fine.
Oh, and Americans, yes, there's Barber and Britten. I'm sorry, Britain is British. Whoops. And it'll come to me in a moment, I hope. There was Howard Hanson. Have you ever heard any Howard Hanson?
No, I haven't done a lot of American. I sing. So I do sort of, I like to sing sort of 19th century French is what I specialize in. And then also...
I think it's probably very nice to the voice.
Yeah.
As opposed to a German aria. Oh.
Well, I do like Schubert. That's
You do like, yes, I do too.
That's the one I do like. Out of, if I'm going to sing German, I'll probably sing that. And then I, this past fall, we sang the film score to Nevsky, Alexander Nevsky.
Oh my God, yeah.
That is quite a.
I do like Prokofiev a lot too, and that's, but yeah, it was. I listen to his Romeo and Juliet ballet pretty frequently. It's just gorgeous stuff.
Yeah, that was a lot of. I'm a tenor, so he was really making me go up there. And then, what sort of drew you to the relationship between horror movie and sort of like queer identity?
Wow, there's a good one. And it was late in coming around because I stumbled into horror films quite early. And I realized the psychological bent was there. If I was like fascinated by Egypt in third grade and started reading up on embalming practices, there's a slightly morbid area somewhere. And somewhere around that time, my mom caught what probably was the first televising of the Shock Theater package, as it was called, in the area, and that was on the now defunct Channel 55, hosted by this kind of fat beatnik named Leroy. I don't know whatever happened to him. But she described this movie she watched, which was probably Bela Lugosi's Dracula, based on some of the scenes she described. I was just going, this sounds really neat. And then in fourth grade, I think maybe I had already started sneaking downstairs to catch this because it started at 11:30. Now the cool thing was, Dad worked third shift, so he was out of the house. Mom was still keeping farm girl hours that she'd go to bed around 10 and get up at 5 in the morning. So I could sneak down and keep the volume very low and watch these movies. And a friend of mine in fourth grade, and isn't it amazing, I remember her name after all these years, Nikki Vanovich. Her mother worked at the local news agency. And she said, if you don't mind the cover missing, we can get you this magazine called Famous Monsters of Filmland. When they bring the new issue in, they get rid of the old one, they tear off the cover and send that back to the publishers to show that it was unsold. Well, that was it. That got started. And I think the thing is with the classical horror films, the monster, as it were, is usually an outsider and a fairly sympathetic figure. He does horrible things, but it's generally because horrible things are done to him. Or if you get to someone like Dracula, who is basically innately evil, still he is doing what he needs to stay alive, which is drinking the blood of people. what do? We kill cows and other livestock so that we can eat to stay alive, because we've somehow convinced ourselves that vegetables alone aren't going to do it. So there is the outsider thing, and the big revelation of like bringing the two together was, as I said, Richard Vallee was openly gay, and in his magazine there were frequent articles basically kind of doing a queer take on classic horror films. And bless Richard, he could find a queer take on dang near anything, you know, even, I don't know, Joe Namath perhaps, or John Wayne, I don't know. But that's kind of when I don't know that I consciously made the connection before then, but yeah, as gays, we grow up as outsiders. And that has many benefits as drawbacks, I think, especially if you're any kind of an analytic artist, let's say a writer. You are seeing the majority of the world from a different perspective than they do. And just to throw out one example that happened to me at one time, a friend who was actually pretty supportive of me made some kind of comment about why do gay people have to kind of like throw their orientation and their relationships, why do they have to push that front? And she said, heterosexuals don't do that. And I said, oh. And I grabbed the Sunday paper and opened it to the pages and pages and pages of wedding and engagement announcements. Like, oh. So yeah, I could see that from my outsider perspective. She was an insider and she couldn't see that. It didn't occur to her that heterosexuals celebrate their lives openly every hour of every day. And I should also throw in, because I think it's a wonderfully snarky and funny comment, another friend of mine who was also more or less supportive. At the time I was involved with Gay Era GUL and writing a column in Lancaster Independent Press just called Gay. She said, I'm glad Harry's out of the closet, but I wish he'd quit slamming the door. She apologized for it years later. I said, Marge, I'm sorry. I thought it was funny at the time. I still think it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, and that like brings me back thinking about like what was it like sort of publishing alternative sort of publications at that time when there was a lot of political unrest going on? Because would that have been during the time of Nixon, or would that have been
Yeah,
early?
the 70s would have been Nixon into Carter.
Carter and then Reagan.
Fortunately, I don't think we'd hit Reagan yet. When was he elected? 80. Yeah. I was because of the theater company taking up so much time, I had moved away from the Gay Era. We passed on to other hands, and I don't think they ever even produced a single issue. They just, for whatever reasons. But David had also moved away from the publication at that point too. But I've mentioned a few things. Obviously, the probable FBI investigation, the problem with printers. I would say possibly my desire to pursue doing theater in Lancaster was impacted because of my open acknowledgement. And Lord knows theater is lousy with gay people. But I was the one who was upfront about it, you know. The others might have snuck off to the bar after rehearsal, but, you know, they weren't publicly acknowledging their orientation. So there was that, and there I was, you know, obviously, as I said, David and I insisted on, you know, use your own name. If you're going to write for us, you use your own name. If you can't use your own name, bye-bye, sorry. So yeah, there were various impacts. I can't recall anything specifically that was really related to the newspaper, except, as I said, the problem with the printers and a few other things like that.
Yeah. And then sort of dialing back, is there anything about your educational history that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about?
Well, briefly, I went into Millersville as an art major, switched over to English partway through, never did get a diploma. Just typical child of the 60s. I took the courses that interested me and ran out of money and interesting courses at about the same time. It was there that I really, really started getting involved in theater because the drama group was run by a fascinating man named Paul Talley, who had very unorthodox approaches to theater, which at first struck me as completely nutball, but it was like, oh, okay, this is different. And I guess different has always attracted me somehow. And he and I actually became great friends after college. He would frequently come over to my apartment and visit, and his interests were so eclectic. I mean, I recall an afternoon when we sat around discussing the UFO phenomenon, which doesn't seem like the kind of thing a professor of theater is going to do. But yeah, we just were. He was just fascinated by everything, and he. I think there was one conversation I had with him. Oh, a gay man, by the way, about approaches to theater and the Stanislavski method. And he said, well, I don't have a method. I do whatever seems to work. If it's a moment I remember from a Warner Brothers cartoon, I'm going to try it. If it's a moment from Wagner opera, I'm going to try it, see if it works. So his productions were really incredibly inventive and totally insane. And I loved him dearly. Yeah. He's gone now, I'm afraid. But
and then, is there anything we haven't touched on in terms of like the jobs you had or your occupational history?
Oh, let me see. Well, after I kind of decided I wasn't getting anywhere with freelance graphic design and artwork, although that still is something I do. Like when I did Scarlet, and obviously through Gayer, I was doing graphic design of the publication as well as editing it. Let's see. So after the Daily News and pre-press and writing, I ended up, there was a point when my mother's health was deteriorating, and I came home one day when the visiting nurse was supposed to show up, and she said, Ella, how did you get that bruise on your face? Bruise? And she said, oh, I fell over and hit the bed. And I went, what? And you did not mention this to me? And as I inquired further, I discovered that she was experiencing dizzy, faint spells always in the mornings. Now, the Daily News was a morning gig. I was getting up at 4 in the morning to get myself ready, get her ready for the day, and then be in there early enough to tackle that sports page if I had to. And it was like, okay, I got to give notice and find something second shift, which I did. Turned out to be a factory job, which fortunately didn't last for long through a temp agency. But in the meantime, I'd also applied at Walden Books, now gone too. Is it something about me that so many of the things I mentioned are no longer around? And got in there over the holiday season, and they kept me on, and picked up a couple other retail jobs at the mall. And that was the first time I'd done retail in many years, but I had done it. I worked at Two Guys after college, and another coincidence, I worked in one of the dirty bookstores in Lancaster for a while. Picked up a couple more retail jobs there, and the manager of the mall somehow noticed me when I was working at Boscov's Optical, and she headhunted me because she knew she had to replace the front desk person in the mall office, and she thought I dressed professionally to come to work. She liked the way I related with customers, and she So she came in, she talked about the job. I said, I got to think it's a little different, although I realized later I'm answering the phone, I'm greeting people who walk in the door. This is different from retail? How exactly? This is different from working at the library? How exactly? So I went back and I said, yes, I will accept the job. And she said, fine, you've already been interviewed. You start on Monday. That led to a series of front desk jobs. And ultimately, I ended up in the AARP program. Well, actually, it's not. It's CSEP. It was begun during the Johnson administration, and it is to train older workers in new job skills. But AARP manages it locally here. So I was in their program. Doing front desk at Curlink, and they have a computer bank for people doing job search, either because they don't have a computer at home or whatever. And I would help these people out on computers. There were a lot of people being laid off from factory jobs that really didn't have much of a clue about computers or the internet, so there I was to help them along, but not too much, because if they weren't learning anything, I mean, if I was just doing it for them, you know, it was a little tricky balance to manage. So that went for a year. And AARP has to reassign its people every so often. They can't be locked in the same place for the 4 years that you're allowed to be in the program. They shifted me over, excuse me, doing front desk at a place called Community Action Partnership, which is a social service agency here in Lebanon. And they run, for one thing, they run medical transport for people who don't have automobiles, and are in one of the Medicaid programs. So it has to be Medicaid insurance, and they have to be being transported to something that will be billing Medicaid, okay? That's one of the programs they run. They also have a big program on, broadly speaking, shelter. So if someone becomes homeless and there's nowhere to go, for them, we might put them up in a hotel for a few days. Mm-hmm. This has to be someone with a plan. We just don't say, okay, you're in a hotel and then you're back on the street. It's kind of like, okay, right now I'm homeless. My disability check comes in on Tuesday, and then I'll have enough money to get a rented room through one of the places that has a rented room in a rooming house. And it's like, okay, we'll put you up in the hotel for a few days. They also run several shelter houses where people, well, families is the main thing, will put them up for 6 months to 2 years, depending on the program. And they have to pass an evaluation and decide if they are likely candidates for getting their lives back on track. There's also a program for rent help for people who have had a financial crisis, which could be laid off from their job, they're out of work for a while, they get another job. It has to be a one-time financial crisis. Another possibility is the car breaks down, the repair is expensive. If I don't repair the car, I don't get to work, then I lose my job, but I can't pay the rent if I repair the car. So they've repaired the car, they've got an eviction notice, we will give them 1 month's rent help. So I was there at front desk on the AARP program for about 6 months, and my time to be reassigned was just about coming up. And one of the guys in the shelter program gave notice because he was fascinated by computers and IT and all the kinds of things I don't understand, like how to program the little suckers, you know. A friend of his has started an IT company, offers him a job. He says, yeah. They decided, on what basis I do not know, they decided to kind of divide it up so that he was one of 3 people doing rent and other things, so they would rotate around. They decided to put all the rent in one package, put all the other responsibilities in another package, and all the other responsibilities beside that in yet another package. And they asked me to be the rent officer. What? I've never done anything even remotely like this before. Well, I sat in on a couple of rent interviews with the one guy who was still doing rent until they filled the position. I thought, well, Well, give it a shot. It pays better than AARP. I'll lose my food stamps. I will lose my medical benefits. Maybe it'll all end up washing out, which is pretty much what it did financially. But I am now approaching 3 years being the rent officer at Community Action Partnership, and somehow this long, strange trip has ended up with me being a social worker.
Okay. So then, for your experience in social work,
None before this.
None before
None
that,
before
yeah.
this.
That's so interesting. There wasn't any sort of like certification or anything you had to go
No,
through? Oh,
no.
yeah.
And the weird thing is, as I look around sometimes, as I'm made aware of other social work positions out there, you've got to have at least a bachelor's, and
Yeah.
I don't have any kind of degree.
Yeah, because I have
Bachelor's, associate sometimes is acceptable. Very rarely do you see the little thing about work experience being applicable, but
because I have a lot of friends who are interested in social work and sort of AmeriCorps positions and stuff like that, and I know that you need usually a bachelor's or a master's.
yeah. And unless you're probably working for the county or the state, like say in the welfare department, I don't think the pay is really good for social workers from what I've seen.
No, like very much across the country, it's not.
I mean, there was a job that opened up not long ago in another social service agency here in London. It's independently funded. Where I work, we've got government funding coming in. Some from FEMA, which of course you've heard of. HAP, which is the Housing Assistance Program, and a group called CSBG, Community Service Block Grants. CSBG is kind of independent. It's not directly government, but their funding is all from the government. And interestingly enough, the Trump budget presented some months ago zeroed it out completely. So anyway, the funding for all three goes to the county government. The county government then funnels it into, in this case, us. In other counties, it may be different organizations. But position opened up, and the attractiveness of it was would have been full time. I would have had benefits, vacation, insurance, blah blah blah. But the pay was, I think, $3 less than what I'm making now. Admittedly, I'm part-time, don't have the benefits, but it's kind of like when I crushed the numbers, it's like, I'll be taking home about the same amount of money, so what's the point?
Yeah.
And I really, really like the people I work with, so that's a big deal too.
Yeah, that's nice. And then, was there any sort of religious presence in your upbringing?
Oh, this gets complicated. I wonder if I want to go into all of this. Mom was a member of the Christ Presbyterian Church, which you would have passed on your way here. As you went around that curve coming into Lebanon, there's a long wooded area which used to be the Coleman family estates. They had coal mining here in the area. And then there was that little church off to the left. Gorgeous little church inside. It has blue ceilings with gold stars painted on them. Fanny Coleman apparently commissioned the baptismal font, and all the statuary from Italy, pure marble. Anyway, Mom was a member of that through her family because her dad was a hunting companion of Old Man Coleman, Fanny's dad. Never knew his first name, always heard him referred to as Old Man Coleman. My father grew up in a household where his stepfather was very, very fundamentalist Christian, to the extent that if his wife or children somehow didn't quite fit into his designation, he felt it was his God-given duty to beat Christianity into them. So he was very anti-religion. So there was that kind of weird split in the household, which possibly led to I did not like attending Sunday school, partly because all these other kids had this background. They knew the books of the Bible in order. And I'd gotten none of that at home because of my dad. However, I did love singing in junior choir. And when the time came to graduate from kiddie Sunday school to adult Sunday school, I kind of told my mom, well, I don't want to go to Sunday school anymore. And she said, if you don't go to Sunday school, you can't sing in the choir. I said, oh, no, then I guess I don't sing in the choir. And that was the end of my church going, except for a couple of times at the Unitarian Church down in Lancaster. So that was the religion. I could go into more things about my dad's background, but I think we're getting a little too strange, a little too deep. Okay?
Yeah. And then sort of your, oh no, never mind. Can you walk me through your coming out process?
It was abrupt. It was kind of like right after that GUL meeting with Mark Siegel, it was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to admit it to everyone, which was not always easy. Or at least I didn't approach it thinking it was going to be easy. A lot of people said, oh, Harry, we always knew. So, yeah, it was fast. It was not gradual at all. It was coming out to the parents. It was a long time coming. And my father never could deal with that up till the day he died. He just, his brother ended up having a daughter who decided, I'm not sure if she's stuck with this, but she decided she was lesbian. And they were down for a visit once, and his wife said, well, Earl, I realize, I found out we've got something in common. We both have gay children. He said, I don't talk about that. So, mother was, I guess, a little more accepting. I'm not sure she was ever really comfortable with it. I mean, you're dealing with two people born in 1920. And again, rural area, very, very right wing, but she accepted it at any rate.
Yeah.
Did you say that you had siblings or no?
I did have a younger brother who died at the age of 13. He was born with a heart defect, missing one valve. I don't know that it was ever told me, but I would say, judging from the configuration of his skull, I think there might have been some Down syndrome going on. But he had a fatal heart attack when he was 13. I was 15 or 16 at the time. And intellectually, he never progressed beyond like maybe a 2-year-old.
In terms of your coming out, did you start dating, or did you have relationships?
Started cruising. Yeah, I've never been one who was successful at establishing long-term relationships. And let's face it, part of the whole scene in the 70s before AIDS changed everyone's thinking, it was we're kids in a candy shop. And there were a couple of relationships that didn't end up going very far, and kind of looking back, it's like, Harry, you should have worked harder. That might have been good. So, but here I am, single and 66.
Yeah. So then going...
Don't let this happen to you.
So then, did you ever have like any sort of your own sort of family formation in your adult life, or?
What do you mean by that? I'm not sure I understand the question.
You know, sort of like a long-term relationship, or maybe you constructed your own family out of friends and things of that nature.
Yeah, there was the, what do you call it, an alternative family, I guess. Mm-hmm. There was a group of us, particularly in Lancaster. And then a different group after I moved back here to Lebanon, of people I associated with that, you know, were, you know, sometimes you got, well, especially when I lived in Lancaster and my parents were in Lebanon, sometimes there was, you know, the holiday gathering, the Thanksgiving dinner or whatever, New Year's celebrations, so forth.
So were you involved with the sort of potluck dinners in that area?
No.
No, okay.
Not now, anyway. Yeah, some of the dinners were potluck. It's like, yeah, bring something.
Yeah. And then did you have any sort of involvement with the military?
Other than sexual? No.
would you have been?
A couple of Marines, but you know.
Would you have been too young for Vietnam, or?
No, I was lucky that right like a year or two before I would have been eligible for the draft, they came up with that lottery thing. And my number was high enough that I didn't get called up, thank God. On the other hand, the same man who introduced me to classical music, we kind of went through hell with him going in and declaring he was gay, which, as it turned out much later, he was, or is, I should say. But at the time, he was not really ready to admit it, but he was going to try that tack to get out of serving. And it was successful, but it was kind of, I mean, that was while we were still rooming together at Millsville University, and the whole thing was an excruciating edge of your fingernails kind of experience till they finally said, okay, we accept the fact that you're queer, go away.
Yeah. Yeah. And then can you walk me through your involvement with Gays United Lancaster and then any sort of other, I guess, sort of organizations based around LGBTQ identity that you've been involved in?
I think I've said as much as I actually remember of Gays United Lancaster. As I said, it was a very busy time, and most of my involvement really was in the initial stages when the Gay Era was still kind of their official publication, but it was also supposedly the gay news magazine for rural gay Pennsylvania. It was never quite an RFD, unfortunately. Is that still around, RFD?
I don't know if that is around anymore.
Yeah, I know it seemed to like move from collective to collective with some frequency, 2-3 issues, and then it was with another communal living arrangement, and it's like, and it was a wonderful publication. I really liked it because one of the benefits of running the Gay Era was that pretty much all the other gay papers, you know, we'd trade issues. So we had them all coming. Boston. What was the Boston publication? It wasn't Boston Gay News, but we got that. Yes, the Boston. It's just called the Gay Community News, GCN. Yeah. Washington Blade, obviously initially the Pittsburgh Gay News before Mark acquired it. All sorts of publications came in, so really cool. And the other thing that we certainly did through GUL was we marched in the New York parade several times. Marching is, I don't know, would I get through that length of that parade on a walker? I don't think so. So my parade days are over, I'm afraid.
How exciting was that?
Oh my God, that was amazing. The first time especially, it's like, I didn't know there were this many gay people in the planet. And of course, Roll Arena going around. You probably don't remember, you're not old enough to remember Roll Arena. I don't know, she or he rather. I am told, and of course I believe there are all sorts of stories, supposedly a button-down Wall Street worker 364 days of the year. Roll Arena got up in outrageous drag with these huge sequined sunglasses, like Dame Edna wears, and just went through the parade on roller skates. Did she carry a wand?
Yeah.
Yes, had a fairy wand. The first parade, as I said, was just completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
Later, it became a fun thing to do. I mean, you went home so charged up, with such a feeling of euphoria and empowerment. And of course, after a week or so, you got used to what was going on in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Like, okay, here we are again. And I remember too being so pissed off. Sorry to suddenly interject profanity this late in the interview. Normally I have the vocabulary of a sailor, by the way. When the news coverage would come on, if any news coverage, we tune in NBC or CBS, and sometimes there wasn't even an acknowledgement it had happened. And if there was, the crowd sizes as announced, it's like, no way. No way there were only 5,000 people there. No way.
Yeah.
So the I mean, it was another reason that absolutely, and I don't want to make the case for the gay era in particular. I don't think it was, in the top rank of the gay publications at that time. But it just kind of like underlined the necessity for us having our own media outlet. Of course, I guess, Donald Trump feels the same way about Twitter, but yeah, it's like, it's not even impacting the New York Times. It's not impacting the Washington Post. At least it didn't at that time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, next question.
Yeah.
I think I've run out of what I have to say there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, of course, looking back at like media coverage at the time, if any, it probably wasn't extremely positive either.
Yeah.
What was it? I looked through articles that were written at the time Stonewall happened, and it wasn't like, right now we look back and we're like, that was the first sort of like moment where it all exploded and everything like that. But they would call it like a group of fairies or something like that.
I didn't even know Stonewall happened, and face it, I graduated from high school in June of 1969. Hello.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been the same day as my graduation ceremony. I've never double-checked the calendar. But I only found out about months later because the guy who decided to do the Lebanon Underground newspaper, Centurion, had a newsstand, and he brought in and kept under the counter the alternative publications, not Village Voice, that was out with the quote-unquote normal newspapers. But there was an even more underground New York paper, the Village something or something, East Village Other, the East Village Other. He kept that and, Screw and whatever gay publications were out at the time. And it was through the gay publications, which even out of New York, were heavily into softcore porno photos. But at least there was some news coverage. And that's how I even knew there had been a Stonewall.
Yeah. And then how exactly would you say your gay identity influenced other aspects of your life, be it your family life, social life, religious, civil, and political, and spiritual?
Probably entirely. I don't know how else I can quantify it. I would never, although I might say I was out, I would never deny it, but I didn't take out a billboard. I've been open in all my jobs, although possibly never more so than in my current one. It's not a secret there. For those who could guess it, fine before, but I would not, on the other hand, take a job where I felt uncomfortable with the political viewpoints, particularly if they were, the homophobic variety. That's just not, no, I'm not going to try to pretend I'm straight and talk about my girlfriend.
Yeah.
I remember when I was at State Farm, which was, let me think, 2005 to 2010. Yeah, the owner was pretty right-wing Christian and right-wing political, so I really kept a muzzle on it there. One of those times, I can't believe I did it that late in my life where I took a job because it paid well. And it's like, Harry, didn't you learn your lesson about this like 20 years ago? But one of the other agents there kept, throwing kind of personal questions to me, and the one where the look on her face after she said, "Oh, you like to cook?" I knew that the penny had finally dropped for her. She'd been holding it for several months, but the penny had finally dropped. It's like, okay. It was certainly no secret when I was front desk for the Lebanon Valley Mall, or in any of the retail jobs I held there. Really just was kind of like this unspoken thing while I was with CareerLink. But I wasn't hiding anything either. And in fact, I actually, while I was at CareerLink, I was at the front desk with another AARP woman, and this young Puerto Rican guy came in, very gorgeous, but also, you know, kind of obviously not straight, you know. And he went back to use the computer. After a while, another young Hispanic man came in and joined him, and it's like, okay, boyfriend, okay. And this woman said, who I didn't realize at the time, but I found out later, was very heavily involved in kind of fundamentalist Christian church. But she said, I feel sorry for these people who don't know what they are. And she did this gesture. Now, if she had done that gesture, which is one of those things that just sets me the hell off, I'm not sure how I would have reacted, but I just said, I'm one of those people. And she said, no, you're not. And I said, yes, I am, and I know exactly what I am. Said, oh, I'm sorry if I'd known, I never would have said anything. It's like, and I'm thinking, yeah, that doesn't change your attitude, not saying anything. Well, it comes out later, her son is gay. And I mean, when I heard that from one of her coworkers, my heart broke, because I thought, how does he deal knowing his mother cannot accept who and what he is? It's the tragedy of a moment like that is overwhelming. And here we are in 2017, and we have not quite erased everything. We've got gay marriage legal in 50 states. My God, I never thought that would happen. Not when I was starting out. And of course, back then the whole philosophy was, oh, we're not straight, we're not going to do anything straight people do. Which kind of gradually changed after AIDS made monogamy a very attractive proposition. And then gay couples started getting married, or at least committed, which didn't stop a lot of, you know, tramping around for many of them. I don't think I know a single gay couple that doesn't do some fooling around on the side. But anyway, and then adoption. Well, I don't want any kids around. I've got enough with the 4-footed kids in the house. So that was never for me either. But yeah, now we've got gay marriage, of course. It looks like socially there's trying to be some rollback between Mr. Trump and Mr. Sessions on various fronts, but I think we've come too far for too much of an impact to happen. That's my optimistic hope.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so hard with finding a job or occupation-wise, because the protections are so patchwork. In Pennsylvania, it really depends on the municipality.
You know what flipped me the heck out? Mm-hmm. Red County, Lebanon, Pennsylvania. We actually had a city councilman once who actually, he Democrat, and he did win. But he ran on the platform of, if Mickey Mouse ran on the Republican Party, he'd be elected. Something about that connected with the voters. They said, no, we're going to elect you too. But flipped me out when I first got the handbook for Lebanon County employees. And I read the non-discrimination policy. Mm-hmm. And sexual orientation is in there. It's like, and I said something to my supervisor. I said, how the hell did this happen in this area? And she said, they hired a very smart lawyer.
Yeah.
And there it is, county employees. And in terms of the services we offer through our agency, we're obviously not allowed to discriminate on the basis of all the other stuff and sexual orientation.
Yeah. Yeah, we recently got ours in Carlisle. This had that happen.
For the whole community, or just the state,
just
the local government employees?
No, not the local government, everyone.
It's everywhere, yeah.
It was in the fall it happened.
The guy who had been, I believe, an accountant on the West Shore somewhere. Pardon?
Dan Miller.
Yeah. Which community was he in on the West Shore? Was it?
Camp Hill.
Camp Hill. Yeah.
That's right by.
Any progress in Camp frickin' Hill?
They just passed it.
Did they really?
Yeah.
And what's become of him? Because I know that he started his own company with his lover, and then got sued for like 6 figures, like hundreds of thousands of dollars by the former company, because I guess, a few clients decided to go with him rather than to stay with them. That was the last I heard of the story. What happened after that?
Very successful. He got elected to city council twice.
That's right, I do remember
And he got
that.
elected to comptroller, and now he's city treasurer.
Whoa,
Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah.
There's kind of progress from 1973 in a nutshell, isn't there? Yeah. What was the lawsuit overthrown, or did he have to pay
He
off
had to
that?
pay it, but he paid it off, and he's doing great. So
That's terrific.
Yeah.
That is really
he's one of
terrific.
my best friends. So I know.
Yeah, I read, my housemate gets the Sunday Patriot, so I read the article. Was it this past Sunday or the Sunday before? Which, of course, included a photo of yours truly. Not the yours truly, but yours truly. And it mentioned him, but it didn't say any, did it really say anything beyond that case? I was going, oh, I kind of lost track of what happened there. That's great. That's really great. Yes, our revenge will be slow and excruciating.
At least it's happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Lucky to grow up during it. So, is there anything in terms of engagement with the community at large, locally, that you want to touch on that we haven't talked about?
Other than through my work, I don't really have any. Physically, we're, I'm not much up for various things. There's the back problems, there's mobility, there is, and we still don't know what the cause of it is, but I've got extreme neuropathy. So even driving short distances is kind of painful. Gripping the steering wheel, suddenly that hypersensitivity of the nerves is like, no, the last real political involvement I had was with the Gay Chamber of Commerce, and when it went from being, I forget what they called it in Bagel, yes, oh my God. Were you ever involved with Bagel? I just don't remember you from there. Sorry about that. And I believe David Lease got me involved in that somehow. Or no. One of the alternative family friends here who had a printing business heard about it and called me up. He said, I'm going to Harrisburg for this meeting of gay business people. You want to come along? I was like, okay. And became a member, attended every meeting for however many years. And when they decided to become the Gay Chamber of, or ally themselves in the Chamber of Commerce, which is a long history of anti-gay policies and generally right-wing political stances, I was just kind of like, I can't quite feel comfortable with this. And that, when did they become the Chamber of Commerce, the Gay Chamber of Commerce?
I forget what year that was, but it's not that long ago.
No, it was. I was still hitting.
But it's not
I
really-
was still going to meetings while I was at State Farm. So sometime after 2005, I think, is when I stopped attending. And of course, I was in Palmyra, so it was a very quick drive to Harrisburg. I think one of the last meetings I was at was one held at the Paper Lion. Wonderful space. I don't know if is that still going. Still, good for them.
And then, are there any important events or turning points in your life that we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring up?
Well, I think we've hit them all.
Yeah.
Lots of left-hand turns there, aren't there?
And sort of we've sort of touched on this, but over looking back, what changes have you seen for the community in terms of wider acceptance or anything like that, and what challenges do you think still remain?
Ooh, well, if we look at polls, just in the last few years, the acceptance of gay marriage has gone well beyond 50%. And it used to be somewhere around 30-something rather, which, isn't that Trump's approval rating? So there's that. There's a wider acceptance. It's still not at 100%, and Lord knows if we're still facing issues about Black and Hispanic civil rights or civil rights for any people of color. Heaven knows how soon that will change, and the world has a history of hating people who are different. And we can just look at, for instance, the Middle East, where there's all these followers of Muslim, but they're different sects. It would almost be like if in this country the Presbyterians and the Lutherans and the Methodists were at war with each other. That's what's happening in the Middle East. the differences can be so freaking minor, but that goes back to, I suppose, the dawn of history, or the dawn of time, even before history was around. So, will it ever totally happen? I doubt it. Will it get better? I hope so. I think so. There is progress being made. As I said, gay marriage in 50, legal in all 50 states. That's nuts.
Yeah.
Never, and really when you think about it in terms of the struggle, we're a relatively young civil rights struggle as opposed to the black civil rights struggle, which precedes us by a couple of decades.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've lost track of the question. We were talking about progress. What was the rest of the question?
Yeah, just progress within the community and sort of wider acceptance.
Within the Lebanon community? No, it's still 1946 in Lebanon. I think it's getting a little better. I mean, I was frankly, a few clients have come in that were lesbian couples and they were very open about it, which is cool. When I was still working retail in the mall, Walden Books had the calendar kiosk every season. And one Christmas I was there attending the calendar kiosk and two men walked by holding hands. So, yeah, and I mean, I thought, geez, I wonder if I would have the balls to do that even now. So, and when you think about just that aspect, that's what propels progress. People being willing to be publicly open. Because that's what happened post Stonewall. We decided to come out. We decided to say who we are. Some of us did. There was a whole. I mean, that was one thing I do remember about some of it. There, some of the gay people I knew when I was doing Gays United Language, like, Harry, what's the point of being out? What's the point? We've got the bars. Yeah, maybe our goal should be set a little higher. Then we get to drink and dance to disco music. I just happened to remember something else. This is interesting, I think, and I don't know if either of you might have heard about it. It was while the gay era was still being published, so we're talking about that 73 to 80 timeline, sort of. The first gay conference in Pennsylvania was held up in the Poconos. Were you there?
No,
but you remember it, yeah.
I know about it.
And David and Marlon and I all went up. I interviewed a couple of people. The only one I remember interviewing was Tom Wilson, if that's a name that rings any bells these days. And then I think the second one was held at the Quaker Church in Harrisburg. Can that be right? I remember a pretty large venue with a lot of people. Is it what is that?
State Museum also had.
That might be the one that was about the third Pennsylvania conference, and people actually came in from Pittsburgh for that one. So, yeah. Boy, and now such things are quite matter of fact, I guess.
Yeah. And then so a question that I've been asking recently is what exactly is it like to be gay during the Trump presidency?
I probably haven't gotten as scared as I should because, as I said earlier, I think certain things have gone too far to be rolled back. And we keep being told that as far as LGBTQ issues are concerned, Jared and Ivanka are they have so many gay friends that they're kind of a moderating influence on the president, but... Allegedly, yeah. I
think they need
I could do the whole time you've got on, your silicon chip for the interview, I could probably do that on Trump right now. It's like, dear housemate Arlene, got me hooked on MSNBC in the evening. So every night we're there watching there, and I'm screaming the TV
Yeah.
screen. Just, I mean, it's not like I don't agree with her political point of view. I adore Rachel Maddow. I would go straight for her. She probably wouldn't go straight for me. But she is just wonderful. But, you know, the commentators come up and they mention something and I'm going, remember the blah, blah, blah. And Arlene's going, oh, I'd forgotten that one. But yeah, it's the whole Trump presidency is infuriating is the only word for it. Oh Lord. I haven't seen, other than the transgender in the military issue, which I don't think is going anywhere. The generals are saying, what? No, he didn't talk to us. We know nothing about this. We're not changing the policy. There hasn't been that many signs that he's going after gay civil rights. On the other hand, his new Supreme Court appointee, Gorsuch, is anti-gay marriage.
Yeah.
Jeff Sessions is anti-gay marriage, and there may be some push to get a case before the Supreme Court, which I feel won't go well.
So we were talking about what it's like being gay during the Trump administration, things of that nature.
Yeah, I don't know how much of what I said of my little diatribe made it to the digital, but yeah, I can only describe it as infuriating on a broad political basis. The man is completely incompetent and completely xenophobic. So, I mean, there are some worries there. I don't know the policy he announced against transgenders in the military, I don't think is going to go anywhere. He claimed he talked to his generals. They say no, and they're not going to change the policy. One worry is that his new Supreme Court judge, Gorsuch, is, well, pretty much anti-civil rights on all sorts of scores, but definitely, as far as I've been able to determine, anti-gay marriage. The Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is not pro on it, so it's entirely possible a case will be brought before the court, and I don't think things will go well on that score. What other gay civil rights issues might come up? Who knows? I don't think I think some state governors are contesting the gay marriage issue. I don't think they're contesting anything else. And yet I wonder, as I was saying earlier, the whole thing is about being out. That's where progress happens. The more people are out, the more the progress. We can think back, well, Barry and I can think back to a time when Disneyland didn't even want gay couples there, would not allow like a gay group to book a day. The turnaround was that they were one of the very first large businesses to have employment protection for gay employees. And I think everything happens kind of like from the roots up. And I think that's true of all civil rights, really. With gay civil rights, it's a little harder because even I don't know how many are still doing it, but, you know, we can hide, you know. We're not black. I guess if we were any color, we'd be lavender. But yeah, we don't have to be upfront about who and what we are. Maybe some of us would be less successful at hiding it than others, but, you know, and that has, I think, always been the challenge too, the whole gay civil rights movement. It's like, well, you know, my employers don't know I'm gay, so I won't be fired. They're not going to find out. Not going to tell my mom. Not going to tell my friends. They'd shun me. So that really has been, I think, from the very beginning, has been the challenge of the gay rights, civil rights movement, and I suppose it still is. I mean, for instance, the printer friend I mentioned who took me to the bagel meeting, he's heavily involved in Republican politics, which I do not understand. How can you be gay and be a Republican? It just baffles me. But certainly he's not exactly out. He wants to, he's tried several times to run for either county commissioner or city council, so, you know, he's running as a presumably straight boy. So yeah, I have to assume it still goes on. Oh yeah, I think I've kind of sputtered to a halt again.
Yeah, totally.
I seem to have a habit of doing that.
Are there any questions about Gay Era that you had remaining, or have we covered everything?
Other than, did you have much experience going out to the local bars and that sort of thing?
Yeah, because I liked hitting the Harrisburg bars, particularly the Rose Rouge was my favorite for a long time. I usually ended up doing the distribution of the Harrisburg bars, getting it out there where they could sell it. Well, there were only two bars in Lancaster. One was a block from where I lived, so that was easy enough. The Old Fiddler, and of course the Tally, which is still around, although I believe George has given up ownership. I'm not even sure if he shuffled off the coil or not.
He's still around.
Is he still
We
around?
interviewed him.
George and Gary is
Gary.
the boyfriend or partner or whatever. I don't know how they describe their arrangement. So those were easy enough. Didn't much hit the Reading bars. I'm not sure. David may have taken care of the Reading bars, and that pretty much takes care of our general area. Everything, all the other distribution was probably done by mail. But yeah, I was a big bar hopper. I was, like I said, the kid in the candy store. It was what did we? I'm not even sure if David came up with this or not, but I ended up doing a back cover spoof on Saturday Night Fever, and we called it Every Night Fever. Something's telling me it's a phrase that originated in the Christopher Street magazine, but I'm not sure. But yeah, I had Every Night Fever, or most Every Night Fever.
Yeah. And is there anything we've missed that we want to touch on?
Wow, nothing I can think of. I mean, you've even prompted a few things that I didn't touch on in the original monologue area of the evening or afternoon.
Yeah.
So I'm not thinking of anything.
And
Barry?
you mentioned you had a fire at your house.
Oh, yeah.
So you lost probably a lot of your...
Pretty much everything.
Yeah, so...
Friends broke in, and really that is what they did. I had third-degree burns of the back, so I was helicoptered up to the Lehigh Valley Hospital burn unit, and was in a chemically induced coma for several days before they brought me around. And although I had no inkling, you know, medical staff really works with a poker face, but apparently even after they brought me out of the coma, they were not sure I was going to make it for a few days after that. Anyway, these friends, dear friends, who, straight couple, who I first met while I was working at Boscov's Optical. Mom brought her son in, who was then 13. And one of those rare times when I wondered if I wasn't part of the NAMBLA crowd, because I just thought, my God, this kid is gorgeous. Anyway, fitted him out for glasses. And then we'd run into each other at the mall from time to time. And after my mom died, she started inviting me. Oh, well, I should also mention that her husband is also a big fan of old-time horror movies. Her son has become one, but he was more into noir at the time. So there was the old movie connection. And she started inviting me for holiday dinners. And so they kind of adopted me. So anyway, and her husband, who at the time was a federal marshal, so of course, you know, typical police mentality, I'm doing it, it can't be illegal. He goes to the house, finds the extension ladder that's hanging over the backyard fence, slams it against the roof of the laundry room, climbs up and climbs through the bathroom window. Only the first floor windows have been boarded shut with plywood, but he climbs in through the bathroom window, comes down and unlocks, and they go in and they start rescuing anything that they can that they think is something I would want. So some things did get saved, but not everything. Yeah, a lot of loss. It's a very strange experience, and sometimes it's not even the big things. I mean, you know, all my clothing was gone because even if the fire didn't get to it, the smoke smell, really. You can never get rid of that. So they left that behind. They're the ones who rescued the scrapbook I mentioned with my dad's postcards. They also, and this is interesting, as I mentioned, I had 10 cats there, or maybe that was before we started rolling. 2 months before the fire, one of the cats that I had brought in, it was, I've had this strange thing. If a friendly cat comes up to the door, I think, oh, you got away, you're lost. I'll take you in, I'll put the ads in the appropriate place, I'll call the Humane Society, I will put the ads in the paper, and your owner will contact me. You know what my success rate has been on that? Zilch. And of course, this cat that I brought in, I think it was after she had been in like maybe a day. I was patting her and I reached under to find out if she was a cat that liked her belly rubbed. And it was like, oh, nipples, milk sacs, you're pregnant. So she gave birth on or about January 1st. It was a very quiet birth. I didn't know it had happened. I came down one morning and I'm hearing this, meow, meow, meow. I actually had to search until I found out where she'd had her 2 kittens. So the fire happens, the Semenza family is in doing their rescue, and she's in the house, and she keeps going to this pile of laundry and nudging away at it. So they finally decide to lift it up and find out what it was, and there were her 2 kittens. She had gotten them in there, so they rescued the kittens. They all went to the shelter. One of them died from, well, I guess lung breathing problems, whatever, which is common in a shelter, but could also have been exacerbated by, the smoke from the fire. The other one I adopted, poor thing, turned out to have health problems aplenty, none of which really were from the fire. The first thing he came down with was bladder crystals, and I almost lost him to that, but fortunately my vet told me what was really going on in time. And then about, let's see, I think it was in February of last year, Arlene, or I said something to Arlene about, he's eating well, but he's losing weight. This isn't gay at all, is it? So she said, I think some blood panels should be run, which we did, and it came up that they can't really diagnose it until there's an autopsy, but from many of the signs, they figured he had the FIP virus, which is sort of like feline AIDS, but not quite the same. So that looked like it was a 2-month death sentence, but we did actually get him past his 3rd birthday, and he only passed away this past year in February, about a year after he'd been diagnosed. 2 days after I got out of the hospital after having an appendectomy. Who has an appendectomy when they're 66? That's a teenager kind of thing. But yeah, so I don't know how I got off on that. You were talking about the fire, yeah.
Yeah, I guess my purpose of asking was if you have any memorabilia that you might want to donate to the History Project of your past connection with the gay community.
That's just it. The big thing that was lost in that fire were all the copies I had of the gay era. Those did not get rescued, probably because the Spencers didn't open that cabinet, maybe didn't even realize my connection. There was one issue where I did a cover drawing of Anita Bryant that I would have loved to have. Maybe did David perhaps contribute any issues?
David, I don't think so, but Joe Burns. Remember Joe Burns?
I remember the name. I'm trying to remember how I remember it.
He was involved a lot in the community. He was from the Allentown area. And
Lehigh-Ho.
Lehigh-Ho, yeah. So,
Yeah.
But he had a big collection he donated.
Of the gay era?
Yeah.
Hokey smoke.
So I think we have all but maybe a few copies.
Wow. Well, then you have more than I would have. I just moved a few too many times, so I didn't save everything. I just kind of, okay, this was a good issue. This was a terrible issue. This was not great. No, if I would go into the basement, I might have a couple of softcore porno drawings from first hand or mandate, but I don't know that you want those things.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, if there's anything that you find later that you might
Okay.
want to donate, we can give you a form to
Yeah.
send them with it. So.
Okay.
We can